The doctor pulled me into the hallway and asked who the father was because this baby is black. I laughed. I thought she was joking. She did not laugh back. I was in a wheelchair, 4 hours post-emergency C-section, still on morphine. My husband Mark was in the recovery room holding our son. My parents were in the waiting room with flowers. I told the doctor, my husband is white, his whole family is white, my whole family is white, there is no way my baby is black. Dr. Okafor looked at me with a professionalism that felt like a warning. She said, ma'am, I am not making this assessment based on a hunch, and I am required to ask you, and I am required to document your answer. I asked to see my baby. She wheeled me in. Mark was standing by the window, holding our son, smiling. The light from the window was on the baby's face. I looked at my son for the first time in good light. His skin was not white. His hair was dark and curling tight against his scalp. His eyes were hazel gold. Mark looked up at me. He said, honey, the doctor asked me something weird. I sat down in the chair by the bed. I said, Mark, I have never cheated on you. Not once. He said, I know. I'm not asking. I'm telling you the doctor asked me something and I don't know what to say. He held our son out to me. He said, look at him. Really look. I took my baby. He looked up at me. I saw my own eyes looking back and something else. Something I have never seen in my parents' faces. I ordered a genetic panel that afternoon. I paid for the expedited result. My parents came in an hour later. My mother Linda was in pearls. My father was carrying flowers. My mother was carrying my baby book. She said, oh my, look at all that hair. He's beautiful. He has a little tan already, doesn't he? So sweet. Too casual. Too quick. I watched her face and noticed she was carefully not looking at his features. My father set the flowers down and did not look at the baby at all. My mother handed me the baby book. I thought you'd want to show him. This is what our family's first version looked like. I opened the book on my lap. The first page was a photo of my mother pregnant, 7 months along, February 1993. I was born in April. That checked out. Except the maternity blouse she was wearing was one I recognized. I flipped to the middle of the book. My aunt's wedding, summer 1992, before the pregnancy. My mother was wearing the same blouse, not pregnant in it. It was not a maternity blouse. It was just a blouse she already owned. In the February 1993 photo, she had padding under it. I closed the book and looked at my mother. She was adjusting the flowers, humming, not making eye contact with the baby. The genetic panel came back in under 48 hours. The baby was 52% European, 38% West African, 8% indigenous Mesoamerican, 2% other. Mark's family had done 23andMe 3 Christmases ago. He was 96% European. Whatever the baby was, it did not come from Mark. I ordered a panel on myself the same day. I paid for the 24-hour result. I am 68% West African, 22% European, 8% indigenous Mesoamerican, 2% other. My parents did 23andMe together last year. They are both 100% European. I sat in my hospital bed holding my son and understood I was not my parents' biological child. I did not tell my husband. I did not tell my parents. I asked them to go home that night. My mother protested. My father quietly steered her out of the room. The next morning, I called the hospital where I was born, St. Margaret's in Portland. A records clerk pulled my file. She said, this is interesting. There's a note in your file flagging your delivery as a private adoption placement. Your biological mother's information is sealed. Your adoptive parents are listed as Linda and Vicente Voss. I asked if my biological mother was still alive. The clerk said, I cannot give you that information without a formal request, but I can tell you that she left a letter in your file when you were 6 months old. It has been here for 31 years. It was marked to be given to her if she ever asks. I will send it to your home address by courier. I hung up. My son was asleep on my chest. I looked at him. I saw a face in his face that I have never seen. A woman I have never met. We came home from the hospital on Thursday. Mark is making me soup in the kitchen. My parents have called 14 times, and I have not answered one of them. The doorbell rang this morning. Mark brought a manila envelope into the bedroom. Small, thin, postmarked from St. Margaret's. I asked him to leave me alone with it for a minute. He did. That was an hour ago. I have not opened it yet. I have been sitting on the edge of my bed looking at it because I am 31 years old, and the woman who carried me decided what I was allowed to know about myself before I was old enough to ask, and I am not ready for what she chose. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, lined notebook paper, handwritten in blue ink. The letters were small and neat, like someone who was being very careful with every word. The date at the top was October 1993, 6 months after I was born. The letter was from a woman named Emery. She wrote that she was 17 years old. She wrote that she had named me before she gave me up. She gave me a name I had never heard before. She wrote about the day I was born. She wrote that she did not have a choice because she was alone and she was a kid, and she had nothing to give me except love, and love was not enough to keep the lights on. And then she wrote the part that broke me. She wrote, they told me you would know. They promised me they would tell you where you came from when you were old enough. I am trusting them with the most important thing I have ever done. They promised me they would tell you. Linda promised this girl, this 17-year-old girl who had just given up her baby, that she would tell me the truth. She promised Emery that I would know where I came from. She had 31 years. She never said a word. Mark came in and I handed him the letter. He sat on the bed and read it. His jaw got tight. He got to the part about the promise and he closed his eyes for a second. Then he put the letter down and said, your mom knew this whole time. I said, I want to call Linda. He looked at me carefully. He said, maybe you should wait. I said, I have waited 31 years without knowing I was waiting. I picked up my phone. Linda answered on the first ring. Her voice was bright. Too bright. Oh, sweetie, I'm so glad you called. We've been worried sick. I was thinking I could bring that casserole you like. I said, Mom, I got a letter today. Silence. Not confused silence. The silence of someone who has been dreading a specific sentence for a very long time. Then Linda said, what letter, honey? Her voice was different now. Careful. I said, from St. Margaret's. From my biological mother. Another silence. Longer. Then she said very quietly, who told you to request that? That's when something shifted. Not anger. Clarity. Because she didn't say, what are you talking about? She didn't say, biological mother. She asked who told me to request it. She already knew the letter existed. She had always known. I said, nobody told me to request it. It was in my file. She left it for me. And you knew. The brightness was completely gone now. Linda said in a voice I had never heard from her. Cold and final. I am your mother. And she hung up. I looked at the letter again. At the bottom, below the signature, in smaller handwriting, like it had been added as an afterthought, or maybe as a last hope, Emery had written her full name, and below that, a phone number. The next morning, I drove to St. Margaret's. The records clerk Charlie pulled my file and set it on the counter. I said, is there anything else in there? Beyond the letter? Charlie hesitated. She looked at my face. Then she said, there are intake notes from the adoption coordinator. I'm technically not supposed to share these without a court order, but she stopped. She took a breath. She said, your biological mother was a minor. She came in alone. The adoptive parents were already selected before the birth. The notes say the biological mother requested an open adoption. She wanted visitation rights. The adoptive parents initially agreed. My mouth went dry. I said, what happened? Charlie looked at the notes. She said, 6 weeks after placement, placement, the adoptive parent's attorney filed to convert it to a closed adoption. The biological mother contested it. She lost. The file was sealed by court order when you were 4 months old. 6 weeks. Linda and Vicente had Emery's baby for 6 weeks, and then they called a lawyer. They went to court. They hired someone to make sure that a 17-year-old girl with no money and no lawyer could never get near me again. I asked, the letter, the one she left when I was 6 months old, was that before or after the file was sealed? Charlie checked the dates. She said, after. She came back to the hospital 2 months after losing the case. She asked if the adoptive parents would pass along a message. The hospital contacted them. They declined. I stood in that records office and I did not cry. I was too busy understanding something. Emery lost in court. She came back anyway. She left a letter because it was the only thing she could still do. She asked the hospital to reach out to Linda and Vicente one more time, just to pass along a message, any message, and they said no. 31 years of silence was not an accident. It was a project. It was something they built, brick by brick, year by year, lie by lie, until the wall was so tall that a 17-year-old girl on the other side could never climb over it. I drove home. When I walked in, Mark met me at the door. He said, your mom came by. I didn't let her in, but she stood on the porch for 20 minutes. She was crying. She said you were having a breakdown. She said the medication is making you paranoid. She asked me to hide your phone. I said, do you believe her? He said, no, but she was convincing, and she left something on the porch. He handed me a small gift bag with white tissue paper sticking out. Inside was a framed photo. Linda holding me as a baby, wrapped in a yellow blanket, her beaming at the camera. I turned the frame over. On the back, in Linda's handwriting, in black marker, it said, this is what a real mother looks like. Don't forget. I set the frame face down on the kitchen counter and walked away from it. That night, I sat on the couch with Emery's letter in my lap and stared at the phone number. 10 digits written in blue ink by a girl who was barely old enough to drive. I dialed. It rang 3 times. Then a voicemail picked up. The voice was a woman's. Warm. The kind of voice that sounded like it smiled a lot. The message said, you've reached Emery. Leave a message and I'll get back to you. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I hung up. I sat there in the dark with just the light from the kitchen spilling across the floor. The number was real. The voice was real. She was alive. My phone rang an hour later. It was Vicente, my father. He does not call. Linda calls. Linda texts. Linda shows up. Vicente stands behind her and carries the flowers. I answered. His voice was low, almost careful, like he was trying not to be heard. He said, sweetheart, your mother is very upset. I said, I know. I am too. Then he said quietly, almost like he was talking to himself, she told me you wouldn't understand. Something about the way he said it made me feel like he had been told that line 100 times. I asked him the question I had been holding since the records office. I said, did you ever meet Emery? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, once, at the hospital, the day we took you home. He stopped. She was crying. She was just a girl. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and she asked us to send photos. She said she just wanted to see you grow up, even if it was only in pictures. Your mother said we would. He paused. We never did. Vicente said, I'm sorry. He said it, and then he said it again. And then he said it a third time, like the word had been stuck somewhere inside him for 31 years, and now that it was loose, it just kept coming. Then, in the background, I heard Linda's voice. Sharp. Who are you talking to? Vicente went silent. The phone was moved. Then his voice came back, small and rushed. I have to go. And he hung up. I waited until almost 10 that night. I dialed Emery's number again. It rang twice. Then someone picked up. A woman's voice. Cautious. Hello? I opened my mouth. I said, my name is. And then I stopped, because I didn't know what name to use. I started over. I said, I was born at St. Margaret's in April of 1993. You left a letter for me. The line went completely quiet. I could hear breathing on the other end. Soft. Shaky. Then Emery said, so softly I almost didn't hear it. Oh my God. And then she said, I have been waiting for this call for 31 years. We kept stopping. She would start a sentence and her voice would break. I would try to say something and my throat would close up. Finally, Emery said, I don't want to do this over the phone. Can we meet? I said yes. She said she could be there tomorrow. I said, I just had a baby. The sound she made was small and soft, like something inside her cracked open. She said, you did? I said, a boy. His name is Augusto. She was quiet. Then she said, does he look like you? I said, he looks like someone I've never seen until now. And Emery said quietly, like she already knew, he looks like me then. The next afternoon, I was sitting in my living room. Augusto was asleep in his bassinet. Mark was in the kitchen. At 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Standing on the porch was a woman in her late 40s. Dark skin, hazel gold eyes. The same eyes I saw in my son's face every time I looked at him. The same eyes I see in the mirror. Emery was holding a small box against her chest. She looked at me and her whole face trembled for just a second before she got control of it. We sat down on the couch together. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then Emery looked over at the bassinet and said softly, may I? I nodded. She leaned over and looked at Augusto. Her hand went to her mouth. She said, he has my mother's face. She told me the beginning. She was 17, senior year. The father had disappeared. Her own mother had just died. A social worker at the hospital connected her with a couple who wanted to adopt privately, Linda and Vicente. They promised an open adoption. Emery signed the papers the day after I was born. She said, I held you for 11 hours before they came to take you. I did not sleep. I just held you. 6 weeks later, she got a certified letter from a lawyer. She said, I left my phone number because I changed it to a new one just for you. I have kept that number for 31 years. I have never changed it. I pay the bill every month, just in case. I was about to say something when there was a knock at the door. Not the doorbell. Hard and fast. Mark opened it. Linda was standing on the porch. She was not crying this time. Her face was set, rigid, like stone. She looked past Mark, saw me on the couch, saw Emery sitting next to me, and stopped in the doorway. She said, what is this? I said, Mom, this is Emery. Linda said, I know who she is. The room went cold. Emery stood up slowly. She said, hello, Linda. Linda did not look at her. She looked at me. She said, you invited her into your home? Into my grandchild's home? I said, I didn't tell you because you have been lying to me for 31 years. Linda walked into the living room uninvited. She sat in the armchair across from the couch. She said, I have not lied to you. I raised you. I fed you. I drove you to school every single morning. I am your mother. That is not a lie. I said, you promised her an open adoption. You promised she could be in my life. Then you hired a lawyer and cut her off. You sealed the records. You refused to pass along a single message. Linda said, I did what was best for you. Emery spoke up quietly. She said, you did what was best for you, Linda. Linda turned to Emery for the first time. Her voice dropped low. She said, you were a child. You had nothing. You couldn't even finish high school. What were you going to give her? Emery did not flinch. She said, you gave her everything except the truth. You gave her everything except me. Linda said, you were never part of the agreement. Emery said, I have the original paperwork, Linda. I brought copies. She opened the small box. Inside was a folder. She placed it on the coffee table. Linda stared at that folder and her face changed. The rigidity cracked, and underneath it was something I had never seen on my mother's face face before. Fear. I picked up the folder. Photocopies of the original adoption agreement. Open adoption. Visitation rights for the biological mother. Signed by Linda. Signed by Vicente. Signed by Emery. Below that, a letter from a lawyer dated 6 weeks later, converting the adoption to closed. Below that, a court filing showing Emery had contested it alone, without a lawyer, and lost. Below that, a note from St. Margaret's confirming that the adoptive parents had declined to receive a message from the biological mother. I looked at Linda. I said, "You told Emery you would let her be in my life. You took me home, and then you erased her." Linda's chin was trembling. She said, "I was afraid. I was afraid that if she stayed, you would choose her. You would love her more. She was young and beautiful, and she was your real mother, and I was just..." And she stopped. She pressed her fingers to her lips. She said, "I was just the woman who couldn't have her own baby." The room went silent except for Augusto making a small sound in his bassinet. For the first time, I saw the full shape of what had happened. Not evil, fear, not cruelty, desperation. A woman so afraid of losing something she never fully had that she destroyed every bridge that might take it away. I said, "Mom, I love you. You raised me. That is real, and nothing changes that. But you stole something from me. You stole my own story from me. You stole her from me, and you stole me from her. You do not get to decide who I am allowed to know. Not anymore." Linda was crying. She said, "Are you going to stop talking to me?" I said, "No, but I am going to have a relationship with Emery, and you are going to have to live with that. And if you try to make me choose, you will not like the answer." Linda stood up without saying another word. She walked to the door and left. I watched through the window as she got into the car where Vicente was waiting. He looked at me through the glass. He lifted his hand. I lifted mine back. Emery stayed for another 2 hours. She held Augusto and told me about her mother, my grandmother, who had the same hazel gold eyes, who sang folk songs, who died too young. She gave me the small box. Inside, beneath the legal documents, was a single photograph. Emery at 17, in a hospital bed, holding a newborn baby. I turned it over. On the back, in the same handwriting from the letter, it said, "My daughter, April 14th, 1993. I will find you." I walked to the mantel and put the photo next to the framed one of Augusto. 2 beginnings, 31 years apart, both hers.